Okay, let me try to explain this real quick, like just off the top of my head. Putin did 9/11, and you're not going to believe me just for saying that Putin did 9/11, because you're going to say, oh, obviously it was Osama bin Laden, blah, 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 right? But who was in contact with Osama bin Laden? One of Putin's military lieutenants or generals. That was revealed by ex-State Duma employee, which is like the Russian Congress for America. It's like in America we have the Congress, in Russia they have the State Duma. He was an ex-State Duma employee. I forget what his name is, Konstantin Barovov, whatever the hell his name is. And he gave info to the FBI in 1999 that Putin was behind the Chechen false flag terrorist attacks, where he blamed the Chechens for doing a terrorist attack, but it was really carried out by the FSB because they wanted to justify the invasion of Chechnya, because the first war, Chechen war, they lost, and then so the second Chechen war, Putin wanted to win, so he had a low approval rating. So when they did the false flag terrorist op, the Russian people, as you see today, were happy about going to war. And so they thought Putin was a strong man, like, oh, he's a good authoritarian leader, he's going to protect Russia against terrorist Chechens. This is, mind you, this is 2 years before September 11th. So you have the Chechen false flag, where it was the 1999 apartment bombings, similar thing as the World Trade Center. And then you have the World Trade Center in 2001, who Putin calls George Bush and says that he has information that Massoud from the Northern Alliance of Afghanistan was murdered, and they reverse the Taliban. And who armed the Northern Alliance and the Taliban? Victor Bout. Victor Bout was a KGB. Okay, let me try to explain this. The agent running illegal arms for the Kremlin, for Putin. That's why Putin wants him back so bad, because they're in a war right now, and he wanted to trade Brittany Griner for Victor Bout. Why would he want Victor Bout so bad, right now? Is because he's an arms sales trafficker, and he was part of the movie Lord of War, played by Nicolas Cage, where the character was based on a mix of Victor Bout and his associate. And so when you look at Vadim Rabinovich, he's a Jew from Russia who was part of, I think he lived in Ukraine, and he basically was stealing arms and sold them to the Taliban. And so when you look at Victor Bout, he was arming the Taliban, he was arming the Northern Alliance. Wayne Madsen said that he had locations in Miami and Dallas, where the 9/11 hijackers were located. And the Promise software, which Osama bin Laden utilized, was sold to Russia from both Rafi Eitan from the Mossad and from Robert Hansen from the FBI. And so when you see that the Promise software was used on 9/11, you can only assume that Russians were running their own operations, and they wanted control of Afghanistan, because Brzezinski had armed the Mujahideen, and they were shooting Russian helicopters out of the sky. And so he was mad about, Russia was mad about that. So they wanted to divide and conquer Afghanistan the same way they wanted to divide and conquer Africa, where also Victor Bout was arming opposition groups so that they would fight each other, and then they would get the resources like blood diamonds mining, which was by Lev Lviv, who was part of Shabbat, and he's tied to Felix Sater, Alan Dershowitz, Donald Trump, and he funded blood diamond apartheid mines. He did blood diamond apartheid mining in South Africa, and then took the diamonds, smuggled them out as black diamonds, which are less profitable than regular diamonds. So when they sneak them out, they painted them black diamonds, and when he gets to the new location, they take the black paint off of it and they sell them for more. And that's the way that he was like rigging the system, getting more money. And it was funding apartheid in Palestine against Palestinians. So they would buy the land with the money. And so this is all one connection thing of 9/11, how Article 5 was triggered for the first time on 9/11. Why do you think that was? Article 5 was made for NATO against Russia. And so if 9/11 happened and Article 5 was triggered, you can only assume that it had something to do with the Cold War era policy of triggering Article 5 against Russia. And then on 9/11, they were doing drills in America called, one of them was called Operation Vigilant Guardian, Operation Global Guardian, and it was a post-Cold War drill. And so if they were doing post-Cold War drills, Putin was probably mad about that NATO still existed, and he wanted to terrorist attack America. So by proxy, he used Muslims, he used Soviet Israeli Jews that have relations with Russia. And that's why you have all these different narratives about who did 9/11. Was it the Saudis? Was it Mossad? Was it the CIA? And it's true. It's the Saudis are obviously working with Russia, the Taliban working with Russia, and so you have the Taliban working with Russia, you have them working with Russia, and Saudis working with Russia, and the Israelis, the Soviet Israeli Jews that were pro-Bolshevik, and 15% of the population of Israel is Russian immigrants. And so, of course, Russia could have both. Muslims and Jews working for them, and it would only make sense in that format, because obviously Jews and Muslims have a rivalry with each other. They don't really like working with each other. And so Article 5 was triggered on 9/11. Operation Vigilant Guardian was a post-Cold War drill. Putin calls George Bush and warns him about Mossad, and then 9/11 happens. And then you have him giving a weird memorial gift to us after 9/11 that people question, like, oh, this is an ugly piece of artwork. What does this even mean? And so there's all these connections that's exactly why he wanted Victor Boot for Brittany Griner. We were going to give him some WNBA player for like the most notorious arms sales guy in the KGB that would have helped Russia win the war against Ukraine. Okay, so that's suspicious. You gotta think which CIA agents were trying to make that trade, because they're obviously briefed about who Victor Boot is, who Putin is. When they arrested Victor Boot under George Bush, George Bush locked up Victor Boot, and George Bush was going to get involved with the Georgian War, but for some reason he didn't. So right there you can see that's why Putin didn't like NATO, because we're going to get involved with the Georgian War. And yeah, and there you go. Georgian War, Article 5, Operation Vigilant Guardian, Victor Boot. There you go.